Who's your favorite doctor? I was always kind of a Tom Baker man myself. And I also like Christopher Eccleston a lot too. But we're not talking about Doctor Who. We're talking about Dr. Quatermass. My name's Random Rob. Welcome back to the new show. And today I'm talking about the 1967 Hammer film Quatermass and the Pit, also known as 5 Million Miles to Earth. Dr. Quatermass was the creation of legendary BBC television writer Nigel Kneale. Kneale wrote a series of serialized adventures that were adapted into television serials in the late 1950s. Quatermass was like a combination of Werner von Braun and Sherlock Holmes. The serialized Quatermass adventures that were done for BBC television were very popular, and it seemed like a no-brainer to adapt them for film. One thing I love about these movies is that they are all presented as scientific mysteries. No backstory, no character development, just figuring out what's going on with some alien threat. Now, the first two Hammer movies made of the Quatermass series, the Quatermass Experiment and Quatermass 2, did not do that well. British audiences tended to prefer the television serials, and Quatermass in the Pit would take almost 10 years to get to the screen. Part of the unpopularity of the films has been attributed to the wooden performance of lead actor Brian Donlevy, and writer Nigel Kneale had often expressed his dissatisfaction with Donlevy's performance. He thought he was a bit of a drunk. In Quatermass and the Pit, the Doctor would be played by Scottish actor Andrew Keir, who Nigel Kneale was very happy with. Quatermass and the Pit was directed by Roy Ward Baker, a modestly successful British director known primarily for his 1958 film A Night to Remember, which is arguably one of the most sensitive and beautiful film portrayals of the Titanic disaster. And although Quatermass and the Pit didn't blow up at the box office, Hammer Films were very happy with Baker's work, and he would end up doing a string of well-remembered movies for them over the next decade or so, including movies like Moon 02, Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, Scars of Dracula, and the wonderful Legend of Seven Golden Vampires. And if you have never heard of that film, go look it up because it's freaking amazing, and I will probably be doing an episode about it sometime in the future. So what is Quatermass and the Pit about? I will try to briefly recap the plot of this wild movie. Excavators working in the London Tube system at Hobbs End discover some bones while they are digging. The excavation is immediately shut down, and Dr. Roney, played by actor James Donald, comes from the local university to begin removing the bones and trying to determine their date. It turns out that these are the remains of early proto-humans that are at least 5 million years old. They are smaller than modern humans, but have enlarged craniums. As his scientific team continue to remove more of these fossilized remains, they discover a metal object, and the military is called in, as early reports suggest it might be an unexploded bomb from World War II or possibly an unexploded V-2 rocket. At this point, the stuffy Colonel Breen, played by Julian Glover, who most modern viewers will remember as the bad guy in Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, gets called in to examine the missile. Then Dr. Quatermass, who had been having a discussion with Breen about his experimental rocket program, tags along. It quickly becomes apparent that the missile is not man-made and possibly not from Earth. Ordinary drills and excavating materials are not able to pierce its surface. Further, it seems to absorb ambient energy. The military bring in a specialized drill that can cut through diamond and try to use it on the hull. And this drilling begins to cause a reverberation to pass through the craft, not only violently shaking everything in the nearby vicinity, but causing extreme mental distress to Quatermass and Colonel Breen and the man operating the drill. Despite the overwhelming evidence to the contrary, Colonel Breen refuses to believe that the craft is anything other than some kind of a German hoax. Quatermass, of course, thinks otherwise, and when Dr. Roney's assistant, Barbara Judd, starts researching the history of Hobbs End, she makes a discovery that adds to Quatermass's concerns, in that she finds out that Hobbs End has historically been a focal point for supernatural phenomenon, including poltergeist phenomena and people seeing visions of the devil. Eventually, the group discover that the craft has a forward sealed compartment. Although the drilling ends up being unsuccessful, it's apparently enough to cause a tiny crack. And as the oxygen atmosphere starts to leak into the forward compartment, the entire wall breaks away, revealing a kind of crystalline cockpit with the corpses of several locust-like alien creatures, which Dr. Roney and his team take back to the university. Later that evening, the worker responsible for the drill returns to the craft to gather some of his tools. Barbara Judd also returns to the tubeway station to get some of her materials. When the engineer goes inside the craft to get his tools, he accidentally causes this strange reverberation to start up again. He is gripped by a terrible panic as the craft begins shaking and loose objects begin flying everywhere around him, and he flees the tubeway station. And as Barbara Judd watches, she realizes that everywhere this man is running, that loose objects are being flung everywhere, wherever he goes. He runs through the street, causing a whirlwind of damage, pretty much destroys a food cart, and ends up collapsing in the cemetery of a local church. When Quatermass and Barbara go to talk to him about what happened, he claimed that he has seen visions of devils, that he saw devils leaping into the sky, and Quatermass pointedly asks him of his visions what color was the sky, and the man tells him brownish and purple. Quatermass and Barbara head to the university, where Dr. Roney is employing the use of a recording device that can broadcast images from a person's subconscious. They take the device back to the craft, and Quatermass enters wearing the recording headset to see if being in the craft will trigger off any of these satanic visions. The energy waves and reverberations begin again, but Quatermass is unable to see anything. But Barbara, as if in a trance now, says she can see something. They put the headset on her, record the images, and take them back to the university. When they project them, they see images of some kind of pitched battle going on between armies of these locust-like creatures, who Quatermass theorizes are Martians. He further hypothesizes that the proto-humans they have found buried around the craft were in fact early humans who were abducted by these Martians, experimented on to give them telekinetic ability and thought transference, and brought back to Earth, essentially as slaves. He further hypothesizes that the descendants of these creatures are modern humans, and that this engineered psychic ability has been passed on through succeeding generations of humans, who all have various degrees of latent psychic ability. And that the more latent psychic ability a person has, the more susceptible they are to the energy and vibrations of this craft. I love this movie. There's so many cool ideas in this film. The idea that modern humans are the result of crossbreeding between genetically altered humans and normal humans. The idea that supernatural forces and witchcraft and visions of the devil all might have a basis in scientific fact. The idea that the Martian craft is made of a living metal which still contains the psychic resonance of its pilots. The idea that racism and genocide might have been passed on to humans from something that wasn't human to begin with. And I won't spoil the ending of the film, but I will say it does build to a pretty hectic conclusion. Now, there are some caveats here. The special effects in this movie are not great. Some of the practical effects are terrific. Anytime the energy reverberations are hitting and things are being thrown everywhere, it's really fun. The death of Colonel Breen is pretty grisly. The cockpit of the alien craft is pretty cool. But other special effects are not really high quality, and you have to... it may be an effort to suspend your disbelief and not find some of it funny. Nevertheless, the performances are great. A lot of the dialogue is very witty and funny. I love how this movie is done almost in a documentary style. I love the idea of a flying saucer being discovered in a subway. This is a movie I really wish they would remake. It almost was remade in the late 1990s. Alex Proyas, who had done the film The Crow. Sidebar, I love his film Knowing with Nicolas Cage. That's a really good science fiction film. God, I would have loved to have seen him tackle this. And I hope someday it does get remade. There's so many wild and crazy ideas in this film. It really epitomizes some of the best of the sci-fi horror genre, especially of that period. As films go, it's a little goofy, but it's got great ideas. When the film was previewed for the censors, several things they didn't like about the film was the noise the spacecraft made. They didn't like it. They thought it would bother audiences. British composer Tristram Cary made the electronic sound effects for the film and the orchestral score. He commented that when he was making the noise for the spacecraft, he kind of hoped that it would end up blowing out speakers at theaters, even though it never did. But I thought it was funny that he wanted it to. It's a cool sound effect, especially when the craft starts to turn white and you can see this veined surface on it. It's really cool sound effects montage. I realized after I recorded this that I had forgotten to mention Barbara Shelley, the great lady of Hammer horror films through the 60s. This was her final film with Hammer. So what are some of your favorite big idea sci-fi horror films? Let me know in the comments below. And if you liked what you heard, press the like button and subscribe and consider becoming a patron to the new show. I could use your help. Okay, that's all for this time. This is Random Rob. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. The new show is made possible by generous support from viewers like Arnow, Skipnick, Christopher, Eric, and B. Thank you so much for your support.